I died and Jesus revealed to me about the New Year's celebration. Testimony of Sister Carol Lynn Williams from Minnesota. My name is Carol Lynn Williams. I'm a 42-year-old former emergency room nurse for Minneapolis, Minnesota. What I'm about to share with you is my near-death experience as testimony of what happened when Jesus showed me the shocking truth about New Year celebration. I never thought I would be sharing this testimony, but after what Jesus showed me during my near-death experience, I cannot stay silent any longer. It happened on December 31, 2023. I was working the night shift in the ER emergency room, as I had done for the past 15 years. Being a nurse on New Year's Eve was always challenging. The endless stream of alcohol-related injuries, car crashes, and general chaos that comes with the celebration. At around 11:45 p.m., we received multiple trauma patients from a massive pileup, a crash accident involving several vehicles, on the highway. Among them was a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, who had been in a drunk driving accident. As my team and I worked desperately to save her life, I couldn't help but think about how my own daughter was out celebrating New Year that night. At 11:58 p.m., while inserting a 4-line into the patient's arm, I suddenly felt a sharp pain in my chest. At first I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just stress, but within seconds, the pain became unbearable. I remember looking up at the clock as it struck midnight, hearing the distant sound of fireworks outside the hospital windows, and then everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was floating above my body. I could see my colleagues working frantically to revive me. I had suffered a massive heart attack. But what happened next was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. Meeting with Jesus. I felt myself being pulled through what seemed like a tunnel of light. The sensation was indescribable. It wasn't frightening, but there was a profound sense of gravity to the moment. Then, I found myself in the presence of Jesus Christ. His appearance was nothing like the paintings or images we see in churches. His glory was so overwhelming that I couldn't even look directly at him, but I knew without a doubt who he was. "Carol," he said, "I have brought you here to show you the truth about what you and many of my children have been blindly participating in. You must understand not just what you see in the physical realm, but the spiritual reality behind these celebrations." What Jesus showed me next was so comprehensive and shocking that I need to break it down into sections to help you understand the full scope of what was revealed to me. First, he took me on what I can only describe as a journey through time, showing me the true origins and evolution of New Year celebrations. But what I saw was far more disturbing than what any history book could convey. Suddenly, without any warning, I was no longer in the place I had just been. We were transported to a scene that looked like something straight out of the past, ancient Mesopotamia *. The air was heavy with a mix of dust and ancient energy. I could almost feel the weight of history in my bones. "Watch carefully," Jesus said. "For this is where it began." The scene around me started to shift as though time itself were unfolding before my eyes, and I found myself witnessing events from around 2000 BC. I was in Babylonia, surrounded by people who seemed to be celebrating something important. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a gentle glow over the people who were gathered together. Jesus explained, "This is the Aketu festival, the ancient celebration of the New Year. It occurs during the new moon after the spring equinox, marking the beginning of the new year for the Babylonians *. It was mesmerizing to watch. The people were dancing, singing, and performing rituals that seemed to carry deep meaning. Though I didn't fully understand them at the time. Then, Jesus shifted my focus. We were now in Assyria, where the new year was celebrated, not during the spring, but near the autumn equinox. The scene around me shifted again, and I was carried through time. I saw glimpses of different ancient civilizations, each with their own ways of marking the new year. The Egyptians, for instance, began their year around 2773 BC, with the rising of the star Sirius *. The Egyptians had their own unique celebrations tied to their calendar. Then I was shown the Phoenicians and the Persians, who celebrated their new year during the autumn equinox, similar to the Assyrians but with their own cultural traditions. The Greeks came next, marking the beginning of their year during the winter solstice, all the way up to the 5th century BC. What struck me though, was not just the diversity of how different cultures celebrated their new year, but the deep rituals they all practiced. I saw various ancient peoples performing purification rites, acts designed to cleanse themselves, physically and spiritually, as they entered into the new year. The Celts came into view next, celebrating on November 1st with bonfires to honor their sun gods. Their rituals were vibrant, filled with energy and reverence for the natural world around them. As we moved through these different times and places, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of connection to all these ancient people. But there was something disturbing hidden beneath the surface. The deeper we went, the more I saw how each of these celebrations was tied to forms of idol worship. Jesus allowed me to see just how deeply ingrained idol worship had become in the way people marked the passing of time. I saw the Romans offering branches from sacred trees as New Year's gifts, later replaced by gold-covered nuts and coins bearing the image of Janus, the two-faced god of gates and beginnings. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I realized how much these ancient celebrations were rooted in worship of false gods. "Watch how my people have been deceived through the ages," Jesus said. As he spoke, the scenes around me shifted once again, showing me the chaotic progression of calendar changes over the centuries. I saw the Roman Republican calendar, where the year began on March 1st, and then the shift to January 1st in 153 BC. I watched as the Julian calendar, adopted in 46 BC, solidified the change. Then, Jesus showed me how this confusion continued through the medieval period. Early Christians considered March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation, as the new year, yet this practice was not universal. Various changes across Europe followed, with Scotland adopting January 1st in 1660, Germany and Denmark doing so around 1700, England in 1752, Sweden in 1753, and Russia in 1918. "Do you see the chaos?" Jesus asked. "I am not the author of confusion, but of peace." As I stood there in the midst of this chaotic whirlwind of history, something darker began to unfold. Jesus now turned my attention to the present day. Behind the New Year's celebration today, the scene shifted again, and I found myself witnessing what happens during New Year's celebrations today, in a world that still clings to these ancient traditions. But what I saw next was deeply disturbing. There in the midst of the revelry, I saw demons, countless evil entities, actively participating in these celebrations. They weren't just watching from the sidelines, they were orchestrating everything. I watched as a demon whispered in the ear of a Christian father, convincing him to have just one more drink at a party. That one moment of indulgence would ultimately lead to a tragic car crash. Another demon encouraged flirtations that seemed harmless at first, but would spiral into adultery and broken homes. I saw dark spirits feeding off the energy of drunken revelry at Christian New Year's parties, where the line between sacred and profane became dangerously blurred. But the most chilling part came when I saw demons specifically targeting church leaders who promoted these celebrations as harmless fun, knowing the spiritual damage they were causing. Then, Jesus took me to a place he called the chambers of consequences in hell. Taken to hell, I wasn't prepared for what I saw there. The chambers were dark, filled with anguish and sorrow. Each section of the chamber seemed dedicated to a specific group of people who had promoted or participated in these pagan celebrations while claiming to follow Christ. In one chamber, I saw religious leaders, pastors, ministers and priests, who had known the truth about the pagan origins of New Year celebrations, but had encouraged their congregations to participate anyway. These leaders were suffering not only because of their own choices, but because they had caused the spiritual destruction of countless lives. "Tell them what you see," Jesus commanded. I watched in horror as one former pastor was forced to relive the moment he had dismissed to church members concerns about the pagan origins of New Year's celebrations, calling them legalistic. Now he had to witness the consequences of his dismissal, not just for that church member, but for generations of families who had continued in pagan practices because of his influence. Another chamber held Christians who had used their influence to normalize these celebrations. I saw social media influencers, Christian bloggers, and parents who had led others astray. Their suffering was intense. They were made to feel the weight of every person they had influenced away from God's truth. It was a painful, heart-wrenching sight. But what broke my heart the most was a vast chamber filled with ordinary Christians. People who hadn't necessarily led anyone astray but had simply gone along with these celebrations without questioning their origins. They weren't leaders or influencers, but their participation had affected their families for generations. Jesus quoted from Hosea 4 verse 6, "My people perish for lack of knowledge." But he showed me the full context of this verse in a way I had never understood before. The ignorance wasn't innocent asterisk. These people had had opportunities to learn the truth, yet they had chosen comfort and tradition over God's ways. The revelation became even more personal when Jesus showed me specific events from recent New Year celebrations. A scene unfolded before me, from December 31, 2023, where a Christian mother was hosting a New Year's party for teenagers, thinking she was providing a safe environment. But as the night went on, demons attached themselves to the young people as they participated in seemingly innocent games. I saw spiritual barriers being broken down, leading to vulnerabilities that would affect these teens for years to come asterisk. Jesus then made a startling connection between modern Christians and ancient Israel asterisk. I witnessed scenes from the Old Testament where the Israelites had adopted pagan practices while still claiming to worship God. God's grief was evident as he watched his people mix the holy with the profane. He showed me how these practices led to serious consequences for Israel. What do you think it means? Jesus asked me, when my word says, "Learn not the way of the heathen." Then he revealed to me the true meaning of this command from Jeremiah 10 verse 2, showing me that it wasn't just about carved idols, but about any practice that originated in pagan worship, no matter how innocently it might seem. The scene shifted again, and I found myself witnessing modern Christians standing before Christ at the judgment, trying to justify their participation in New Year celebrations asterisk. "But Lord," they said, "we did it to celebrate you. We even had prayer at midnight." Jesus' response was heart-wrenching. "When did I ever ask for this? Did I not give you my holy days to observe? Why did you choose the traditions of men over my commanded assemblies?" Asterisk. What happened next made me realize the stark contrast between God's appointed times and the man-made holidays that have come to dominate our lives asterisk. The feasts that the Lord appointed. Jesus showed me the deep spiritual significance of each of God's appointed feasts. The Passover, which reveals Christ's sacrifice, the days of unleavened bread, teaching us about removing sin. The day of Pentecost, which shows us the giving of the Holy Spirit, the Feast of Trumpets, which points to Christ's return, the Day of Atonement, which pictures Satan's removal, the Feast of Tabernacles, which reveals God's kingdom, and the last great day asterisk, which unveils God's plan for all humanity. What I saw in that moment shattered me. The deep significance of these appointed times, God's holy days asterisk, was so much greater than any tradition we had created. It was a reminder of the eternal and profound truth that God has a plan, and his plan involves us living in a way that honors him, not the traditions of men asterisk. The night that changed my life forever began with something as ordinary as the New Year's Eve celebration. But what I experienced, what Jesus showed me, went far beyond anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just the usual party atmosphere, the countdown, or the fireworks that filled the night. It was the spiritual reality that I was blind to, the unseen forces at work behind the celebrations, influencing not only the physical world but also the souls of those who participated asterisk. Jesus had taken me on a journey, showing me the true spiritual consequences of these celebrations, and it was more shocking and disturbing than I could ever have prepared myself for. He called it the Gallery of Consequences, a place where the direct spiritual impact of New Year's Eve celebrations was laid bare. It wasn't just a vision of the current night's festivities, but a panorama of the spiritual ramifications stretching back through history and into the present. Secret behind the day of New Year Eve. He began by telling me, "Watch this night unfold." And with those words, I was instantly transported across time zones, witnessing New Year's Eve 2023 from a completely new and spiritual perspective. The world appeared unchanged on the surface, but as I watched from the heavens, it became clear that the reality was far different. In New York City, I saw a Christian family gathered together, watching the iconic ball drop in Times Square asterisk. There was laughter, joy, and excitement filling the air. But what struck me immediately was the spiritual presence around them. Dark shadowy figures that began attaching themselves to the people in the crowd. With every cheer at midnight, a shadow seemed to fall over their souls. I couldn't help but be horrified by the children in the crowd, their spirits affected by their parents' participation in the celebration, unaware of the spiritual toll it was taking on them. In Chicago, I saw a church hosting what was advertised as a Christian New Year's party. They prayed, sang worship songs, and celebrated the new year with good intentions. But even in this seemingly holy space, I could feel dark spirits moving freely through the gathering, unnoticed by those in attendance. Each moment of celebration seemed to open spiritual doorways, generational doorways, that would continue to affect families for years to come, if not for generations. The atmosphere that night was one of spiritual vulnerability, and it wasn't just about having fun, it was about a deep unseen conflict playing out in the spiritual realm. In Los Angeles, the scene shifted to house parties. Young Christians, seemingly having innocent fun, were actually being targeted by demons. These weren't the kind of spiritual attacks that were immediately visible to the eye, but in the heavenly realm, I saw how demons were specifically aiming at those raised in the church. To the physical eye, these parties were no different from any other house gathering, but in the spiritual realm, it was clear that a much larger battle was underway. These young people were under attack, and what appeared to be harmless fun was actually spiritual warfare in disguise. As I moved from one scene to another, Jesus showed me the stark reality of how every part of New Year's Eve was spiritually charged with darkness. The statistics that I'd heard on the news suddenly took on a new meaning. I saw the 50% increase in drunk driving deaths between Christmas and New Year's not as a mere result of alcohol, but as something far more sinister, a spiritual force driving people toward destruction. The 41% of traffic fatalities involving drunk drivers wasn't just a coincidence, but a result of demonic influence. Even the celebratory gunshots fired into the air, an act that seemed harmless to the physical world, were being guided by dark spiritual entities, whose purpose was far from innocent. But what was even more profound than witnessing these real-time events was the history Jesus revealed to me. He showed me the spiritual parallels between the ancient Israelites, mistakes in the way modern Christians were following the same path. Jesus quoted a passage from the Old Testament. "When I commanded Israel, after the doings of the land of Egypt, wherein you dwelt, shall you not do, and, after the doings of the land of Canaan, whether I bring you, shall you not do, this was not just for them." He reminded me that this principle applied to his people today, not just to the Israelites of the past. He took me back to scenes from ancient Israel, how they too had mixed pagan practices with the worship of God. The Israelites believed that combining these practices wouldn't harm their faith, but the truth was much darker. Over time, these compromises led them into captivity. What was once seen as harmless soon became the foundation for their spiritual downfall. Jesus showed me how this same pattern was playing out in the present day, where modern Christians were unknowingly participating in practices that originated from paganism, not realizing that the effects of such participation would not only impact them but would affect their families for generations. Then Jesus showed me something that shook me to my core, the spiritual authority structure behind these celebrations. Satan, as the god of this world, had intentionally established a counterfeit calendar of celebrations to draw people away from God's holy days. Remember, Jesus said, Satan deceives the whole world. He showed me how the enemy had used confusion about dates and times to lead people away from the truth. The world's New Year celebrations, with their roots in ancient pagan practices, were part of a deliberate attempt to replace God's holy days with counterfeit alternatives. I witnessed how this deception spread throughout history. The ancient Romans, for example, celebrated New Year's with Janus worship, honoring the two-faced god of gates and beginnings. As history progressed, the Catholic Church attempted to Christianize these pagan practices, only to have Protestant churches gradually accept them as well. What had begun as a purely pagan holiday was now a worldwide tradition, completely divorced from its original meaning. Modern commercialization had further obscured the pagan origins, making it even harder for people to see the truth. But the most disturbing part of the revelation came when Jesus took me into the spiritual realm and showed me how demons had been strategically placed for New Year's Eve. These demonic forces had been assigned to target Christian families, and they had teams specifically stationed in each time zone. The demons celebrated whenever a church hosted a New Year's event, seeing it as a victory in their battle to keep God's people in spiritual ignorance. Jesus spoke to me with sorrow, saying, "My people say they want revival, but how can I pour out my Spirit when they cling to pagan practices?" I had never heard such sadness in his voice before. It was as though he was pleading with his people to understand the consequences of their actions, to recognize the spiritual warfare that was happening all around them. He then showed me the spiritual impacts of various New Year's traditions, things that most people wouldn't think twice about. The toast at midnight, for example, was more than just a celebratory gesture. Jesus revealed it to be a form of drink offering to false gods, a practice that had its origins in pagan rituals. The singing of Auld Lang Syne, often thought of as a simple New Year's song, was actually carrying spiritual implications of allegiance to old pagan ways. The fireworks, meant to usher in the new year with joy, had originally been designed to ward off evil spirits. Now, however, they are knowingly reinforced ancient pagan beliefs that were still alive and well in the spiritual realm. The most heartbreaking part of the vision came when Jesus showed me the spiritual inheritance that was being passed down through these celebrations. Parents, without realizing it, were slowly but surely weakening the spiritual discernment of families. What was once a tradition to celebrate the new year had become a spiritual battleground, where the forces of darkness were claiming victory year after year. Jesus then led me to what he called Chamber of Lost Opportunity*. In this place, I saw how different history might have unfolded if Christians had remained faithful to God's holy days instead of adopting pagan celebrations. I saw families who would have experienced powerful spiritual breakthroughs during God's appointed times. Children who would have grown up with a deeper understanding of God's plan. Communities that would have been transformed by observing God's true holy days instead of participating in pagan festivals. The contrast was stark, and it was clear that these decisions had far-reaching consequences. Jesus also revealed how Satan used New Year's Eve to specifically counteract God's spring holiday season. The world celebration of the New Year in the dead of winter stood in direct opposition to God's New Year in the spring. Pagan renewal rituals were meant to replace the redemption that was offered through the Passover. Worldly resolutions, often focused on self-improvement, stood in stark contrast to the genuine spiritual transformation that came with God's appointed times. I witnessed the real-time consequences of Christians' participation in New Year celebrations. Jesus showed me how their compromise with these pagan holidays hindered their spiritual growth. I saw a pastor who couldn't understand why his prayers for revival went unanswered. I saw a family that was struggling with continuous spiritual battles, unaware that their annual New Year's parties were opening doors for the enemy to attack. I saw a youth group losing young people to the world, not realizing that their compromise with pagan holidays was weakening their spiritual foundation. Jesus then took me into the chamber of current consequences, where I saw the effects of New Year's Eve celebrations happening right at that very moment. Demons were assigned to every major celebration worldwide, systematically breaking down spiritual barriers in Christian gatherings. It was clear that every choice to participate in these celebrations was contributing to the weakening of spiritual defenses, and it was happening on a global scale. The revelation became intensely personal when Jesus showed me how my own past participation in New Year celebrations had affected my family. I saw times when I had dismissed the Holy Spirit's gentle conviction. Moments when I had influenced others to participate. The spiritual vulnerabilities I had unknowingly created in my family were now evident, and I couldn't ignore the weight of it all. But then in the midst of the darkness, Jesus showed me hope. He revealed what happens when people chose break free from these practices. The moment they decided to reject the pagan origins of these celebrations, immediate spiritual protection was established. Generational curses were broken and families experienced newfound spiritual clarity and power. I realized that there was hope for those who were willing to repent and turn from these ways. Tell them about my true holy days, Jesus commanded, showing me the beauty and power of God's appointed times. Each of these holy days had deep spiritual significance. 1. Passover, teaching redemption through Christ's sacrifice. 2. Unleavened bread, showing how to remove sin from our lives. 3. Pentecost, marking the giving of the Holy Spirit. 4. Trumpets, pointing to Christ's return. 5. Atonement, representing Satan's ultimate removal. 6. Tabernacles, picturing God's kingdom, and 7. The Last Great Day revealing God's plan for humanity. Before I was sent back to my body, Jesus gave me a final warning to share. The time for ignorance was over. Judgment begins at the house of God, and those who know the truth must speak out. He showed me how Satan would try to discredit this message, using religious leaders to claim liberty in Christ, and accusing anyone who spoke out of legalism. Social pressure and ridicule would be used to silence the truth. Finally, Jesus showed me what would happen to those who heard this warning, but chose to ignore it. Their spiritual vulnerability would continue, their prayer and spiritual effectiveness would weaken, and their families would lose their protection. As I returned to my body, gasping for air in the the clock read 12:15 a.m., January 1, 2024. I had been clinically dead for 15 minutes, but the revelations I had received during those minutes would take a lifetime to fully understand. Since that night, my life has changed completely. I resigned from my nursing position to share this message full-time. I began studying and observing God's true holy days and documenting similar testimonies from others who have received revelations about pagan holidays. The response has been mixed, with some immediately recognizing the truth, others becoming hostile, especially church leaders, and many others curious but fearful of making such a radical change. But I cannot stay silent. The stakes are too high. This message is not just about New Year celebrations, it's about choosing between God's ways and man's traditions. It's about deciding whether we will truly serve God on His terms or continue to mix paganism with Christianity. Remember Jesus' words, "You shall know the truth and the truth shall make you free." The choice is yours now. Choose wisely, for the spiritual battle is real, and its consequences are eternal. I died and Jesus revealed to me about the New Year's celebration. Testimony of Sister Carol Lynn Williams from Minnesota. My name is Carol.